you can put questions in the chat box, and I'll check when I change over to Chris. It's a pleasure to be co-presenting with Chris. I'm going to be kind of big picture piece, I think, and Chris is going to get down into the actual practice of school gardens in action and things. And hopefully between the two of us, will help people lose any fears over what it means to use your classroom outdoors and in the school garden. So I hope to communicate three things. Number one, that when you think about your classroom, that it should include the entire schoolyard, and that learning outdoors for kids is effective learning. Number two, that learning doesn't have to be something that you add on top of what you already normally do. It should be able to be an enhancement for what you normally do, and it should help with kids' engagement and retention. And finally, I'm going to try out my three big ideas of life science. If you've heard these before, great. We'll do a review. If you haven't, they should be something that you could take the class out on even a moment's notice and still make whatever you do effective. All right, there we go. All right. I won't belabor this, but you know, the effectiveness of outdoor learning has been established for a long time. Some people just know it intuitively, but we've had major publications that have made that possible. Last Child in the Woods is probably one of my favorites. FOSS, which is used by many school districts around the county, any of those served by the ESDs, Battleground. Thank you, Battleground teachers, for showing up here today. I see you in the participant list. They adopted the Boston Schoolyard Project some years ago, and they now have, in the edition that we use, an outdoor extension to every single part of every investigation. That means kids, if throughout a grade level, if they did them all, would do about 12 a year. And if you think about that over a 6-year curriculum span, that's 36 specific outdoor experiences that would enhance their learning. I hope kids would expect that. In recent years, we've taken more notice of what outdoor learning can do for kids' social and emotional health, which has come to the forefront of education, as some of those things have to come first if you really want them to learn in the classroom. So Harvard Medical School in particular looked at that. So part two, you know, that's a bold claim to say, oh, you don't have to reinvent the wheel or reinvent every lesson or that. But I want really to get the message that there's been extensive work, both locally and even nationally, about how to take the most common curriculums in this area. It's FOSS, STC, and Mystery Science. And we've looked at the lessons that are a normal part of that curriculum and looked at where do they already ask the teacher to take kids outdoors. And we've put those all together. So that's, if that's ever been a concern or a fear, or if you get grilled by your principal about that part of it, just know that that work's been done, and I'm volunteering to help share that. Whatever work we've done as a collective, we'll be glad to share that. And there's some examples on the screen, but I'm going to go more specific later. Oh, back up. I almost missed my cue. All right, so here we go. I'm going to give you time to think. If you could only teach kids 3 things outside or about life science, what would you teach them? I'm going to wait for 10 seconds and let you get them in your mind. Okay, here we go. So you might know your grade level standards real well and have said something really specific like pollination or something like that. But here's the 3 big ideas that the national and state science standards are kind of based on. What does it mean to be and stay alive? I like to use the phrase, is it alive and will it survive, whenever I work with kids in the field. what role does each living organism play in their environment? And so that key idea is the interaction of all living things. And then this is a little tricky, but kids get it. How do we know if organisms are related? And of course, when they think of related, they might think brother, sister, uncle, or whatever. We're thinking biologically related. And so it's the first introduction to kids about the concept of genetics and how organisms are related. Okay, with that in mind, I'm going to try to do an example and see if this resonates with you. I see Jan Solberg on the list, and if she hasn't discovered it already, not too far from her last year's classroom is the Glenwood School Garden, the picture on the lower left. It looks much better now. That's just after I first planted it. And they'll have easy access to go out and take a look at those. And if they looked at some of those wilty looking little plants, they might ask, is it alive and will it survive? And not far away from that, in the Lauren Garden, some red flowering currant plants and actually a special kind of genetic corn called glass corn. And that'll be available for those students when they get there. And so they can start asking those questions. My first crop of the year out of those gardens were potatoes. So here we go. If you asked a second grader, is a potato alive? It would not be unusual for them to say, of course not, right? And so there's a specific investigation in the science kits, the FOSS science kits in particular, where kids sprout a new plant from a potato to help prove that, of course, it was alive all along. It just needed the right environmental conditions, right? And out in my Lauren garden, things weren't perfect. You might notice in the bottom middle, there were creatures eating our potatoes growing out there. So great question. You know, who is eating these potatoes and who else lives in the garden? Who is that evidence for? That would help get that second big idea. And finally, we purposely planted red, purple, and white potatoes so kids could get an idea that there is variation even within a variety of, within a species, and having them figure out how closely are they related? Are they sisters and brothers? Are they cousins? Are they more distant related? And you can do that with any group of plants or animals in our gardens. So I'm gonna wrap up a little bit of that big idea in my main message of include the outdoors as your classroom. It's absolutely good if you go outdoors. It's even better if you plan to teach out there. And of course, it's best if you just say, I consider the outdoors part of my classroom. What do you do when you get there? Well, just observing is an important skill kids need, and they need to improve upon it. I can tell you that. If you get them to observe and use the 3 big idea questions to discuss, it's even better. And my favorite is observe, discuss, and record. And then, of course, return to that so that kids get the idea of a long-term project and data collection and seeing change over time. There's specific help for kids to get some of those big ideas and involved with them over time. So giving kids seeds, of course, is great. Having them engage with what a life cycle is even better. And I'll go back to my phrase, is it alive? Will it survive? Really get to that big idea. Lots of the lessons involve them having collect leaf patterns. So I showed you the garden, but most school grounds have a wide variety of trees on them. So collecting leaves is great. Comparing those leaves is even better. And then recognizing patterns in the veins really tells you that they are using that close observation. there are just an absolute ton of resources out there. Almost every major agricultural university has put things together. Washington State University has some great student resources and teacher resources. I just put up these two as if you need a starting place that I like to go to a lot. One is the Washington Native Plant Society. You can see that they've got activities that very much go along with most of the major curriculums and fleshed out into kindergarten through 5th grade and even middle school. And based out of Olympia, the Pacific Education Institute has phenomenal things about leading kids in the field and pedagogy and things like that. And I know Chris is going to talk more involved about that. I'm just going to point you to that as a resource. If you didn't know about that, I think it would be very helpful. And as we mentioned at the front, there's a whole group of people that want you to be successful here, this whole Clark County Nature Network. Certainly I'm volunteering to do some of that curriculum kinds of things if you need help, but there's guest speakers from places or just technical help from people, composters, recyclers, Friends of Trees, Clark County, Green Schools programs. They're all available to help support teachers and want to do that. Oh, and I think that's it. So Jane, if you want to take that back and we can transition to Chris, I'll check the chat bar for any questions that might have come up.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark. It was awesome, as always. Chris, go ahead and share your screen, and then you'll be good to go.
Okay. Okay, can you see that? Can everybody see that?
Yep, you're good to go, Chris.
Okay, awesome. So thanks, Jane, for putting this together, and thank you all for being here. And thank you, Mark, for that great introduction. That really does get people thinking, I think, and makes it a lot more possible for people to take their students outside. So my goals for this presentation, I'm going to share a little bit about the benefits of taking students outdoors and learning outdoors. I want to talk about the challenges to taking students outdoors, and I want to hear from you about some of your challenges. And then we'll be connecting outdoors activities to different curriculum parts. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I think it's really important for us to know the benefits of teaching and learning outside because it does require a change in our mindset, and it does require a little bit more work on our parts, especially if we're new to it. So if we understand the benefits, that might be motivation to help us move in that direction. During this time of the pandemic, being outdoors is much preferable to being inside. There's more space for physical distancing when we're outside, and there's also better air circulation. But even during normal times, being outdoors provides a multitude of benefits. The fresh air and sunshine, sometimes here in the Pacific Northwest, brings more oxygen into children's brains, the students' brains, and there are also feel-good brain chemicals that are stimulated by being outside. A change of scenery benefits some students, so just the movement from being within the four walls of the building to being outside. Some students can even focus better with the varied stimuli of being outdoors. And implementing new learning styles, which you're going to have, the students will learn differently when they're outside. Those different learning styles can help students learn more effectively. I had a student, a first grader once, and we were out, it was a gardening class, and we were focusing on vegetable gardening, and we all had tasks that we were supposed to be doing. And this one little boy was just totally off task. He wasn't being bad. He wasn't being disruptive. He just wasn't doing the tasks that I put in front of him. He was wandering around the garden and he was doing this and that. And this was when I was fairly new to working with kids outside. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna show him when his mom comes to get him, I'm gonna have him tell his mom what we did in class. And so class was over and his mom came and I said, hey, Ian, why don't you tell your mom what we did in class? Of course, I'm thinking he's not going to be able to tell her anything because he wasn't paying attention. And boom, 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 he rattles off every single thing that we did, everything we wanted to accomplish during that class. And that was a real eye-opener to me, that even when the kids look like they're not on task, they could still be absorbing the information. And it's just their learning style. When the same material is taught indoors versus outdoors, kids can perceive it differently. There was a study from Rutgers Cooperative Extension, and it showed that gardens and being outdoors in general can function as living laboratories. Students who participate in gardening have a considerable increase in grade point average. They utilize new learning styles and they develop their perspectives and ways of learning, and they're able to incorporate 21st century skills such as curiosity, flexibility, open-mindedness, informed skepticism, creativity, and critical thinking. So those are all important benefits of being in the outdoor, in the living lab of the outdoors. The outdoors also has a calming effect. Being outdoors can help students to decompress from stress. And as Mark said, with the new interest in social and emotional learning, we're finding that when kids are less stressed, they're able to learn better. There are also beneficial chemicals, natural antidepressants that are present in the soil. And those chemicals are actually absorbed through the skin. So when kids or adults are outside with their hands in the soil, in the dirt, they not only do they think they feel better, they actually are feeling better. What are some of the challenges that you face when you think about taking your students outdoors? If you'd like to unmute and just make a comment, that would be great. If you'd like to type something in the chat box, that would be fine too. Anyone? I can't actually see the chat box from this screen, so.
So
Jane.
weather and engaging the whole class are the two big ones so far, Chris.
Okay, okay. So you may have heard this comment before. A lot of people who are very interested in the outdoors will say there's no such thing as bad weather, just the wrong clothing. So that can be one thing. I mean, weather definitely can be a challenge. I teach 2 gardening electives and a nature studies elective. We meet weekly at River Home Link, and I tell the kids to always be prepared to go outside, because even though it may not be raining at the beginning of the day, it may be raining by the time we have class, or vice versa. It may be raining when they leave the house, but it may be nice and we're able to go outside in the afternoon. So yeah, planning ahead and just knowing those expectations can help a lot. So some of these challenges: I've never taken my students outdoors. I don't know what to do or how to do it. I don't have enough time. How can I manage 20 or 25 or more students outdoors by myself? And I'd love to take them outdoors, but I have to stick to the curriculum. So I'm going to address these one by one. I've never done it before. So just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. One of my mantras for starting a garden or an outdoor learning space, or really a lot of things in my life, is a 2-word mantra: start small. Both words are very important because I have to start somewhere, right? And sometimes that just means jumping in and trying something and making mistakes and readjusting and continuing to move forward. I also try to start small so that I can feel successful. If I take on too big a project, I might become overwhelmed and quit, and then I'll feel like a failure and I won't want to try it again or continue moving forward. So by starting small, I start someplace, and then I can always expand my skills as I gain new experiences. I don't have enough time. I know that teachers have limited time that is constantly in demand. Starting small reduces the amount of time needed for planning and implementing an outdoor activity. Quick observations are a great way to, quote, get your feet wet while teaching the students how to transition from indoor to outdoor learning. I was going to say that the only material needed were clipboards, paper, and pencils, but in reality, the only materials needed are the students' 5 senses. Even a 5-minute walk around the schoolyard, the garden, or the outdoor learning space allows ample time for observation, especially if the students are prepared ahead of time. And that's actually a whole nother presentation about outdoor management and preparing students to go outside. A few minutes spent sharing their observations, preferably while still outdoors, allows the students to internalize what they just experienced. Over time, the observations can expand and have parameters or prompts, and this was kind of what Mark was talking about too, involving writing or sketching or even taking the form of a scavenger hunt. Whatever the activity, sharing the observations with the group is vital to the experience. Classroom management. The thought of taking a class of elementary or middle or high school students outdoors can strike terror in the hearts of even the most stalwart teaching veterans. While these groups present their own challenges, there are some common techniques to classroom management. We find that when students go outdoors, they often self-manage. And especially if they're prepared in advance and they are reminded that they're still in class. This isn't recess. A lot of times when the only time kids get to go outside is when it's recess. And so if we remind them that it's not recess and it is still class, they're a lot more likely to pay attention. And also setting physical boundaries. You need to stay within this area. The natural leaders will often rise to the top when they're placed in a different setting. And who those leaders are could be surprising, a difference from when you're inside and outside. And students find new skills in which they excel and they find enjoyment. Another way to manage the class would be to collaborate with another teacher to divide and conquer. So you could share the responsibility with the teacher by planning 2 related activities, one indoors and one for outdoors. The indoor teacher would run an ongoing activity while the outdoor teacher takes small groups out for a shorter outdoor experience. The use of parent volunteers can also help with classroom management. If you have them, use them, I say. In my experience, parents get very excited about the opportunity to learn outdoors too. And they often ask very good questions and make interesting observations. And sometimes it's interesting to see how students interact with someone else's parent other than their own. And also another technique might be to have multiple stations or activities. And while this may seem counterintuitive, it may seem like more work, sometimes having several short, more or less self-running activities or stations allow students to rotate through several different but related activities. And I know that this works really well for garden tasks. I can have 5 different garden tasks and put a small group at each task, and every 15 minutes or 10 minutes have them change. And it keeps them engaged, and it keeps them pretty much on task, except for Ian. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be advancing. Nope. Finally, I understand also the need to connect to curriculum. It was several years into homeschooling when I had the epiphany that I was not the slave to my curriculum. The curriculum was my tool. A public school setting is definitely different than homeschooling, but in some ways the idea is the same. The curriculum is the framework for meeting your learning goals, and it's usually not the mandate for managing your class. To paraphrase Jeannie McCarty, who is the executive director of Real School Gardens, when teachers are planning their lessons, I want them to think about the learning garden or the outdoors just as they would any other teaching tool available to them. So I like to say, you know, it's just like the rulers and the calculators and the paintbrushes and the glue and the scissors. It's just another tool that we can use to help our kids meet their learning goals. Some ways that you can start to see the outdoors as a teaching tool includes looking across all subject areas. Science, sorry Mark, science is not the only subject that lends itself to outdoor learning. In fact, I would venture to say that at least part of the learning goals of all subject areas can be met outdoors. Looking at the curriculum through different eyes is a skill that we can develop as well. When the standard says, engage effectively in a range of collaborative discussions, one-on-one, in-group, blah, 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 and do that by coming to the discussion prepared, having read or studied the material, blah, 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 and report on a topic or tell a story or recount an experience, blah, blah, blah. That sounds a lot to me like participating in an outdoor exploration and having a short discussion about it. Developing visual and auditory observation skills. These are skills that are used at all grade levels in all subject areas and build upon each other the more they are used. And if you take a look at the learning goals and the state standards, you'll find that things like observation and reporting and recording are skills that show up a lot, and those are definitely things that can be done outdoors. Being outdoors also helps to make connections. Being able to read about something and then go outside and do it or experience it solidifies the learning. So does being able to think in analogies, such as, if this looks like that, does this function like that? If this leaf is fuzzy and a mammal is furry, does the fuzz on the leaf function the same way the fur on the mammal? And so by going outside and finding some fuzzy leaves and then doing some observations, some experiments, you can help the kids to find the answers to questions like that. This ability to make connections ties the learning to real world experiences. And finally, changing the perspective. Students can process information differently when the perspective is changed, and going outside definitely changes a student's perspective. For example, you can have them look at the world as if they were a flower or an insect or a grain of sand. Why is that flower shaped the way it is? What is the purpose of that? What happens when a raindrop crashes down on an ant? So changing perspective, helping them feel like what it would feel like to be as small as an ant, or even, you know, as big as a thundercloud or whatever. So are you ready for some ideas? So in science, the life science piece, to me, that's the low-hanging fruit. Doing life science outside just seems to be a given. But there are other kinds of science that can be done outside. Lots of weather observations, having a simple weather station, soil composition, decomposition as well, erosion, those kinds of things, geology, the changing seasons, observing the seasons, and not just with animals, but all that's going on around us can be observed outside. Learning about hydrology, about the water cycle, about how water moves through the environment, and also about cycles in the environment, not just life cycles, but other kinds of cycles, mineral cycles and weather cycles. For language arts, there's a lot of garden literature. I mean, some of the easy things would be like to read The Tale of Peter Rabbit and then go out and plant some of the vegetables that Mr. McGregor had in his garden. But there are lots of those kinds of books that cover more than just vegetable gardens. So to be able to read a book and then connect it to the outdoors. The outdoors is great for creative writing prompts, to give your kids a prompt, look for this, do that, what would it be like if this, and then to go outside and write about it. Being outdoors, if it's a new experience for kids, is also going to include new vocabulary. So vocabulary building is another skill that you can develop when you're outdoors. And also, if your classes participate in either free voluntary reading or sustained silent reading, those are great places. Those are great activities to do outdoors as well. One of our high school English classes, the door opens right out into the outdoor learning space. And when the weather's nice, those high schoolers are out there. Some of them are standing, some of them are sitting, some of them are in the sun, some of them are in the shade, but they're all outside in the fresh air doing their free voluntary reading. Social studies lends itself to a heritage or a cultural garden. Our 3rd and 4th graders planted a pioneer garden, so they researched the kinds of crops that pioneers on the Oregon Trail, who came across the Oregon Trail, would have planted when they reached their destination. So they looked at the crops that people would be growing to feed themselves, but they also grew a little bit of wheat because they found out that that was the cash crop that the pioneers used to sell. The outdoors is a great place for the study of native and indigenous plants. So obviously we can look at the plants that grow around here, but also we can study plants that grow other places and try to decide if they would survive here and what would be the struggles that they might have here. Ethnobotany is the way that different cultures use plants, but also other natural materials and natural resources. So that would also be a social studies skill. And finally, the study of food systems and resource use systems. So that could even be manufacturing. You know, where do those factories get their raw materials, and how does that impact the environment? And, you know, going outside and even seeing how erosion works in your outdoor learning space, or seeing if there are any effects of pollution from nearby industry. Math in the garden, I love symmetry. I think symmetry is just so fun. And if you plant, especially a square foot gardening, vegetable garden, it's really fun to plan out your garden to be symmetrical. It's also fun to plant a quilt garden, which has a pattern to it. If you use the square foot gardening method, it's a good way to teach arrays and multiplication. Obviously, the garden is really good for measurement, whether you're measuring wild plants, or you're measuring garden plants, or you're measuring the area that a certain organism might need a certain amount of space to be able to live in your area. And the Fibonacci sequence and ratios. The Fibonacci sequence is fascinating, and when you learn about it and you go outside and you start seeing it, you'll see it everywhere, and the kids get really excited about it. And then also area and volume measurements. So if you're building raised beds, if you need to bring in soil, how much soil do you need to fill that? How much water are you going to need to water that bed? So all kinds of connections there. In art, obviously the natural world has a lot of inspiration for art. The leaves and the flowers on a plant. It's a great place to do all kinds of sketching. Um, there are lots of art projects that use natural materials. There are projects that you can make natural dyes, or you can collect materials and press them or weave them. There's just a ton that you can do. And then finally, design. There's a lot of design opportunities in the outdoor world. Patterns are something that I think come up in many, many different subject areas. And again, studying, observing, comparing and contrasting different kinds of patterns just makes the kids think in a different way. And again, it's one of those things that sometimes once they see it, they can't unsee it. Once they see the difference between a repeating and a random pattern, they'll be finding patterns everywhere. And there are not just physical patterns, but there are patterns in the seasons and in different environmental and even social changes that we go through. And finally, for social and emotional learning, being outside, as I mentioned at the very beginning, gives the kids an opportunity to self-manage. It teaches them cooperation when they're working in small groups. It gives them, if they have meaningful work to do, and this is actually a Montessori concept as well, giving kids meaningful work really builds their confidence. And also they can learn what's the word I want to use? They can learn the feeling of being excellent at a task. And there's a lot of studies that show that students that have a disability, if you can find a task, one task that they can do, and they can do it well, it just does wonders for them and for their classmates. I've heard a story often about a student, and maybe Jane, maybe this was one from Haug, a student that would push the wheelbarrow. That was the only job he had. And all the other students knew that if they needed a wheelbarrow, they would call to him and he would come over with the wheelbarrow and they'd load it up and he would take it wherever it needed to go. And so the kids learned to see that even though he had a disability, he could still participate and he could still have a meaningful job to do. I think that's all for me. I have a few resources here. I like the Kids Gardening web page. It's from the National Gardening Association, and they have a page of teacher resources, and a lot of their lesson plans do cover other subject areas besides just science. The National Wildlife Federation also has a good page of educational resources. The Private Eye is an organization that I don't even know how to describe it. They publish a book and a curriculum, and they use jeweler's loops, which are small eyepieces that a jeweler uses for magnifying, to observe the world. And when the students are observing with the jeweler's loop, they ask questions like, what else does this look like? What else does this remind me of? And so they're thinking in analogies, and it fosters critical thinking, and it also can help them to discover some of the ways that things in nature are interactive or how they're connected to each other. And then finally, there's my email down on the bottom. I am available for more conversation and for more consultation. I know that this was a short presentation, and obviously I couldn't cover everything that I wanted to cover, and everybody's situation is different and unique, and so everybody's needs are going to be different. So please, I have another mantra besides start small, and that's there's no such thing as a silly question. So if you have a question, the best way to get the answer is to ask it. And I promise you, I will never roll my eyes at you and say, I can't believe you didn't know that. So feel free to reach out if you have more questions. And now I think we're ready to take general questions for both of us.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much, Chris and Mark, for that. Really impressive information. And so yeah, so just a couple of things that came up in the chat box that I want to make sure we covered. We talked about weather and what to do and how to manage kids. Some of the other questions that came up are, how do you keep your notebooks in good shape? How do you address kids who constantly need restroom breaks? How do you make sure it's inclusive? Chris, I think you talked on that. Any other things to talk about? Keeping your materials organized and in good shape as the kids move in the garden.
We, in Nature Notebooks, well, we have binders that the kids use in class, but when we go outside, so I have to say this, I hope it doesn't get back to the Battleground School District, but I have run this garden program since 2004 without a budget. And so most of what I have and use in the garden is stuff that I salvaged. And somebody was throwing away a whole bunch of binders that had the pocket in the front. And so I tore off all those binder covers. And so we have all these, we just call them our writing boards. So it has a pocket that you can put your paper and your pencil in, and then they can do their stuff. And then when we go back in, hopefully the holes are already punched, and then they can transfer that right into their notebook when we get back into the classroom. And then we use those with the vegetable garden as well. We keep our garden plans in a writing board like that.
Awesome, thank you. We also had a comment from Rainey saying, what can community partners do to help support our teachers with campus nature learning? And there are all sorts of ways to help, but I'll let Chris and Mark maybe answer that really quick.
I don't really know.
I know the most common request is they love it if you can come to their class. And I know that's a stretch for some community agencies, but I also know some people that are willing to do that. So, you know, there's lots of great Master Gardener volunteers that sometimes will come out. Friends of Trees, I know, has come out. Lower Columbia Estuary Program has come out. And so I guess what I encourage teachers to do is get to know who the partners are in this Clark County Nature Network, because they are part of this support group because they want to contribute in some way, and sometimes that can mean a personal visit when that's finally allowed, or hey, who knows? I was a guest Zoom teacher in my second grade granddaughter's class last year, and maybe that's what it is for this fall. You know, but I think the key is there's quite a support system that wants to help. So sometimes you just have to ask.
Right.
And sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right? We don't know who we want or what we want. So by reaching out to Jane or Mark or me, you know, you can tell us what your goals are, and we can try to connect you to the person who could be the most help to you.
Right, and the community resources, as Mark mentioned, our Clark County Nature Network is pretty broad and getting broader every day. So the city of Vancouver, if you're in the city limits, has the urban forestry program, and they have an education coordinator, Jessica George. So whatever your topic is, I put my email in the chat box. Go ahead and email me, and we can connect you with the resources for what you need. Another piece I want to touch on when it comes to gardens at schools, and I hope you can all see the webinar series form. Give me a thumbs up. Yep, thanks, Mark.
Yes.
The top picture there is Sherry Larson, who was our garden coordinator at Houck Elementary. She is a certified horticultural therapist, and that's another way to connect kids to your garden if the teachers don't have their footings yet. Recess programs and after school clubs, connecting kids with purposeful activities that have a whole lot of science behind them, but to the kids, they're just fun exploration and discovery. So we're going to cover that in one of their other topics called Rethinking Recess on October 7th, and we have some amazing partners that are going to talk about those kind of activities at recess to help engage kids. So when you look at the list here, there's so many great people that we can reach out and help to. But we also know that the gardens are so important. You know, going back to school is going to be hard for all of us. And if nothing else, the gardens are going to be an amazing place for us to go decompress and de-stress and to ground ourselves. You know, we'll get to math and literature and all that at some point, but if we need to go outside and breathe and look at nature, we know we're going to be calmer just in that setting, let alone trying to learn something. So if you have a garden space at your school, but you don't know how to use it, or if you have some trees or some shrubs that you can go out and at least let the kids wander a little bit, it will help them calm down and help the teachers. We're all going to be stressed. We're all going to need spaces to decompress and have those emotions. So if nothing else, that's a great place to start as well. I'm going to, so a couple of questions here really quick. Can we share the slides? Yes, we can. So a great question about Yakult. Needs to talk with their admins. So I think between Mark, Chris, and myself and several others in our partnership, we're very familiar with the admin teams and your facilities teams and your grounds crews and what their concerns are and what their parameters are for adding gardens. And we'll be talking about those at some of these other sessions. So this third session there, greening of schoolyards, I'll cover that topic on what it takes to add gardens to your school. So we're very familiar with all the standards and parameters and the risk managers and the lawyers who say, have this, don't have that. So we can definitely help anybody on the call here talk about what it means to add those features to your garden.
So if I could say something in the chat, I see that Michelle Swartz said her own level of knowledge is one of her challenges. And I don't know, maybe I'm Pollyannish, maybe this is the homeschool mom in me talking. I don't think it's a bad thing to let your students know that you don't know everything. I don't think it's a bad thing to go out and learn along with your students. You don't have to know everything. You just have to know how to guide them through the exploration or through the observation, and you can learn right alongside them.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that being said, I absolutely agree. Knowing that teachers might want to have some specific, and I know there's some teachers in the audience, if we can gather enough people together, we can make that a professional development opportunity where you could visit a school garden, see some of the different examples. I've got a great Start Small one out of Glenwood. Chris has got a great one at River Home Link. The Hazeldale one is coming up in the rotation. So you can see all different levels of possibilities.
Yep, and I'm gonna put a plug in for Michelle Sano, who's the Clark County Public Health Green Schools Coordinator, and her team are doing an amazing job. And we're about to start work on, we've got an inventory of where a lot of these school gardens are in our community and in the multiple districts across Clark County. And so they're putting together a story map, which is an online resource that will show you the pictures and the stories of each of these different gardens, including contacts. So we're gonna, if you Google Clark County Green Schools, we're gonna be able to get you more information. So once again, go ahead and register for those other sessions because you'll get more and more information as we go along. To be respectful of everybody's time, I'm gonna put a poll up really quick. I've never done this before, so bear with me. We're gonna see if it works. But especially if you need a certificate of completion, go ahead and fill in that poll. Give me a thumbs up if you see it. Actually, I see it in Chris's glasses, so yeah. So go ahead and answer the poll there if you could. There's 3 simple questions. Was this webinar helpful? Would you be interested in additional information? And if there are specific topics, go ahead and type those in the chat box of what you would need from professional development sessions, because Mark has the magic to get some clock hours. So if you are a teacher or you know colleagues who need STEM clock hours, we can definitely help get you some clock hours. And this, I'm going to put Chris and Mark on the spot and say, hopefully we can repeat this similar session later once schools start to reopen and we start to see what our new normal looks like, and we can tailor this conversation to a future one. But with the poll open, we're seeing that lots of folks are interested in more STEM, elementary school education, some social emotional And once again, at that recess session, we're going to talk a lot about social and emotional learning and how those programs can really help the kids be successful outdoors.
Yeah, that's great, Jane. I think we should. You've got a good enough agenda here. We should allow clock hours for this for those teachers that want to get it. And I mentioned earlier I might do a shameless promotion here. I see STEM as one of the high-ranking things. For only $10, the Washington State Science Teachers virtual convention in October has literally hundreds of STEM clock hours available. So if you're a teacher in the audience, take note.
Not a shameless promotion. It's really good information. That's awesome. I also want to let folks know that there's going to be a new online book resource that's available, put together from a couple hundred collaborators who do exactly this kind of work across the country into an online resource, knowing that there is going to be a big push to teach outdoors post-COVID, whatever that looks like when schools open. So at the upcoming sessions, I'll post that when that resource is online. It's through Green Schoolyards America. If you Google that, you can find a bunch of resources already, but there'll be an online book that not only infrastructure and the pieces, but also the curriculum and how to teach outdoors. So that literally will cover everything, and it has been reviewed by medical experts and epidemiologists. So don't feel overwhelmed that that you don't know what to do, because there's lots of information, but we're going to try to distill it down to exactly what you do need to be successful, because we know we can all have information overload. Mark, say the science thing again, please.
Yeah, sure. It's the Washington State Science Teachers Conference. Actually, they're teaming with Oregon, so it's both Washington and Oregon Science Teachers Associations. It's October 9th and 10th, I believe. The basic fee is $10 for the conference, plus whatever your clock hours cost. But I know at my last Washington State Science Teachers meeting, they said that there was, I'm going by memory, but it was close to 300 potential hours. So lots of STEM qualified PD through that conference.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions? Oh, can non-teachers join the conference? I think the answer is yes, right, Mark?
Yeah, Kostya, can non-teach? Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Any other questions? I don't see anything else popping up in the chat box or the Q&A. So I once again want to thank everybody for coming today. I am honored that you're all here to listen to these two wonderful resources who live here and work here in our community. Once again, even if you start small, even if there's so many other ideas out there, like using iNaturalist with your iPads or your Chromebooks to have kids do their own inventory of what's on their site. There are so many great ideas that we want to be a network. So if you're interested in doing this, join us to help each other, support each other. And at some point we want to have a big session where we can all get back into a conference room again and meet everybody face to face and share some of Chris's excellent baking skills that she always brings to our sessions. So.